Right now, on almost every computer and phone in the world, 1/10 plus 2/10 does not add up to 3/10. It comes out a tiny bit off, not because the machine is broken, not because someone made a mistake. It comes out wrong because of the way computers store numbers, and it comes out wrong the same amount every single time. It's a small thing. Most people never notice it. And it turns out to be one of the strangest little truths in all of computing. So that's where this starts. In order, through the ideas in computer science that even people who work with computers all day still find a little confusing. I've spent a long time reading about this material, and it's some of the most interesting there is. So I want to walk through it. The plan is simple. Small number quirks first, the kind that live inside one machine. Then the odd things that happen when several machines have to agree with each other. And at the very end, a handful of questions about computers that turned out to have no answer ever and never will. Each idea gets told plainly with a small, everyday picture to hold on to, and then the next one. Let's begin with the numbers, because that's the simplest place to start. A computer stores a number a lot like scientific notation, the kind used to write down very big or very small amounts. There's a string of digits, and there's a marker that says where the dot goes. Move the dot left for a small number. Move the dot right for a big one. That sliding dot is where the name comes from. The dot floats. So these are called floating point numbers, and the whole way of doing arithmetic with them is called floating point arithmetic. It lets one small pile of bits stand in for the distance between two galaxies or the distance between two atoms just by sliding the dot around. That flexibility is the good part. Here's the catch, and it's a small one. People count in tens. 10 fingers, 10 digits, base 10. Computers count in twos. On and off, high and low, base 2. Everything inside the machine is really just long strings of ones and zeros. And when a number gets written in base 2, some perfectly ordinary fractions stop being tidy. Think about the fraction 1/3 in our normal base 10. It doesn't end. It's 0.333, and the trees go on forever. No amount of paper will ever write the last three, because there isn't one. 1/3 just doesn't have a neat finish in base 10. The same thing happens to 1/10 inside a computer, but for a different reason. In base 2, a fraction only comes out neat and short if its bottom number is built out of twos. 1/2 is fine. 1/4 is fine. 1/8 is fine. Those are all halves of halves. But 1/10 isn't made of twos. 10 is 2 times 5, and that 5 is the troublemaker. So when a computer tries to write 1/10 in base 2, it gets a pattern that repeats forever. 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, on and on, never landing, never finishing. The machine can't hold a number that goes on forever. It only has so much room. So it does the sensible thing. It writes down as much of that repeating pattern as fits, and then it rounds off the rest. What gets stored is a number extremely close to 1/10, close enough for almost anything, But it's not exactly 1/10. It's a hair more. Now the trouble becomes clear. When the machine stores 1/10, it stores a number a tiny bit off. When it stores 2/10, it stores another number a tiny bit off. Add those two slightly wrong numbers together, and the small errors ride along. The answer lands a whisker away from 3/10. The computer isn't confused. It did exactly what it was told with the numbers it actually had. The numbers it had were never quite the ones anybody typed in. This is the thing to notice. The error was baked in the instant the fractions got stored. The addition just carried it forward. The same quirk shows up in other small ways. Ask a computer for the sign of pi, which in real math is exactly 0, and it won't give back 0. It'll give back a number almost unimaginably close to 0, but not 0 because it never had the real pi to begin with. Pi can't be written out in full either. The machine rounds it, works with the rounded copy, and hands back a rounded answer. Everywhere numbers can't be written out in full, the machine keeps a close copy and moves on. There's an even stranger effect hiding in here, and it's a subtle one. In ordinary arithmetic, the order things get added in doesn't matter. 2 plus 3 plus 4 is the same as 4 plus 3 plus 2. Grouping doesn't matter either. But once numbers get rounded at every step, the grouping can start to matter. Add 3 floating point numbers one way, rounding along the way, and the result lands on one answer. Add the very same 3 numbers in a different grouping, and the result lands a tiny step away. The math a person learned in school promises those should match. Inside the machine, with rounding at every stop, they sometimes don't. It's small, it's real, and it surprises people who write software for a living. There's a practical habit that grows out of all this, and it's a telling one. People who write software learn early never to ask a computer whether 2 of these decimal numbers are exactly equal, because 2 calculations that should land on the very same value often land a hair apart for all the reasons just seen. So instead of asking whether 2 numbers are equal, careful programmers ask whether they're close enough within a tiny margin. Even something as innocent as 6/10 divided by 2/10, which ought to come out to exactly 3, can come back a whisker off on many machines. And there's a related oddity in how these numbers are spaced. They aren't spread out evenly. Near 0, they sit very close together, fine and dense, and far from 0, they spread apart, coarse and wide. So the machine can tell tiny numbers apart with great care and can only tell huge numbers apart in big, clumsy steps. The bigger the number, the wider the gaps between the values the machine can actually hold. It's a strange, lopsided ruler, finely marked at one end and roughly marked at the other. For most things, none of this matters even a little. A slightly wrong number in the last few decimal places won't spoil a photo or a song or a bank balance rounded to the penny. The machine is close enough. But every so often, someone follows one of these tiny errors all the way to the end of a long calculation, and it stops being small. The idea of storing numbers this way is old. A Spanish engineer named Leonardo Torres Quevedo wrote about keeping numbers in this floating exponent form back in 1914, working from Charles Babbage's old designs. In the late 1930s, in Berlin, Konrad Zuse built one of the first machines that actually stored numbers this way in base 2, using bits. For decades after that, different computers did it differently, each with its own little rules, which made numbers behave in slightly different ways from one machine to the next. Then, in 1985, the industry agreed on a single shared standard for floating point numbers so that a calculation would come out identically no matter whose computer ran it. That standard is what nearly everything uses today. It even settled a careful set of rules for how to round, so the rounding itself would be predictable, and predictable is the point. The little error in 1/10 isn't random, it's exact. It's the same tiny amount every time on every machine that follows the standard, which is a strange kind of comfort. The mistake is dependable. Most of the time, the story ends there, harmlessly. But there are a couple of times it didn't, and they're worth telling plainly without drama because the facts carry themselves. The first happened on the 25th of February 1991 during the Gulf War at an army base near Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. A Patriot missile battery was on duty, watching for incoming Scud missiles and trying to knock them down. To do its job, the battery had to keep very careful track of time. It counted time as a whole number of tenths of a second since the moment it was switched on. To turn those tenths into plain seconds for its aiming math, it multiplied by a stored version of 1/10. And that stored 1/10, of course, was the slightly wrong one, a hair off, the same small error the machine always makes. On its own, that error is nothing, far too small to see. But this battery had been running without a restart for about 100 hours straight, 4 days and more. And over all those hours, the tiny error didn't cancel out. It added up again and again, the same small amount each time, until the battery's sense of time had drifted by about a third of a second. A third of a second sounds like nothing, too. But a Scud missile in flight covers a lot of ground in a third of a second, roughly half a kilometer. That was enough to put the incoming missile outside the little window of sky where the battery was looking for it. The battery searched the wrong patch of air, found nothing, and let the Scud through. It struck a barracks. 28 soldiers were killed. The whole chain of it began with a fraction that can't be written out in full, followed patiently for 100 hours. The second happened on the 4th of June, 1996. A brand new European rocket called Ariane 5 lifted off for the very first time, carrying years of work and a very expensive payload. About 40 seconds after it left the ground, it tore itself apart and was destroyed. The cause, once the official board dug into it, was a number that didn't fit. Deep in the guidance computer, a large floating point value describing the rocket's sideways speed was being copied into a much smaller slot, meant for a smaller kind of number. The speed was too big for that little slot. It overflowed, and the guidance computer, faced with a number it couldn't hold, failed. The rocket lost its way and self-destructed. Around $500 million gone in under a minute. The strangest part of the Ariane 5 story is the subtlest one. The piece of code that failed hadn't been written for Ariane 5 at all. It had been carried over, unchanged, from the older Ariane 4, where it had worked perfectly for years. On the older rocket, the flight path was less steep and the sideways speed never got big enough to overflow that little slot. So the code was correct there. Nothing in the line itself was wrong. It only became wrong when it was moved to a bigger, faster rocket where the old assumption silently stopped being true. Correct code turned into broken code without a single letter changing because the world around it changed. That's the whole shape of this first idea. Computers store numbers in a clever sliding form that lets them handle the very large and the very small. To do it, they keep close copies instead of exact ones, because exact often can't fit. Almost always, close is plenty. Once in a great while, someone follows the smallness all the way down, and the smallness turns out to matter. 1/10 plus 2/10 still doesn't quite make 3/10. It never will. And now the reason for it is a settled fact. The next quirk lives inside a single machine too, and it starts with a very human idea, a fingerprint. Computers deal with enormous amounts of data, files, passwords, whole libraries of text. And often a computer needs a quick way to tell one lump of data apart from another without dragging the whole thing around every time. So it uses a trick. It runs the data through a little machine called a hash function. The data goes in. What comes out is a short, fixed length tag, a string of bits, always the same size, no matter how big or small the thing that went in. That short tag is the fingerprint. In computing, it's called a hash or a hash value. The nice thing about this fingerprint is that it's short and steady. A tiny password and a giant book both come out as tags of the same modest length. The computer can compare two fingerprints in a blink instead of comparing two whole files letter by letter. It can use the fingerprint to find where a thing was filed. It can use the fingerprint to check whether a file arrived unchanged. Fingerprints make a lot of everyday computing fast. But here's the catch, and it can't be escaped. There are only so many possible fingerprints because each one is a fixed, short length. There is no limit at all to the things that can be fed in. So there are more possible inputs than there are possible tags. Far, far more, which means sooner or later, two different inputs must come out with the exact same fingerprint. Two different files, two different passwords, two different books, and one shared tag. That's a hash collision. Two distinct things that the fingerprint can't tell apart. There's a plain way to see why this has to happen. Picture a wall of mailboxes and picture more letters than there are boxes. If every letter has to go in a box, then at least one box ends up with two letters in it. There's simply no way around it once the letters outnumber the boxes. That old, stubborn bit of counting has a name in mathematics. It's called the pigeonhole idea. More pigeons than holes means some hole holds two pigeons. Fingerprints are the holes. The things being fingerprinted are the pigeons. There will always be more pigeons than holes. So collisions aren't a flaw someone can fix. They're a promise built into the counting. Now, a person might think collisions must be terribly rare, since the number of possible fingerprints is usually huge, and a specific collision is rare. Hunting for something that matches one exact fingerprint on purpose is very hard. But there's a sneakier version of the question that turns out to be much easier, and it has a lovely everyday shape. Think about birthdays. There are 365 days in a year, give or take. To find a person who shares one particular birthday, say a certain date picked ahead of time, a lot of people have to be asked, because any single stranger almost certainly won't match that one day. That feels hard, and it is, but change the question. Instead of matching one fixed birthday, just ask whether any two people in a room share a birthday with each other any day at all. That's a different question, and the answer is surprising. Gather about 2 dozen people in a room, and the odds that some pair among them shares a birthday climb past half, past even. With only 2 dozen people in a year of hundreds of days. The reason is that the number of pairs grows fast. 2 dozen people don't make 2 dozen chances for a match. They make a chance for every pair, and the pairs pile up quickly, far faster than the people do. So a match between some pair, any pair, becomes likely long before a room is anywhere near full. That gap between the two questions, the hard one about a specific match and the easy one about any match, is called the birthday paradox. It isn't really a paradox. It just runs against what most people expect. The same math applies to fingerprints. Finding two different inputs that happen to share a fingerprint, any two at all, is far easier than finding one that matches a chosen target. And people who try to break into systems know this. When they go looking for a collision to abuse, they don't hunt for one exact match. They lean on the birthday trick and look for any collision at all, because any collision will do. That approach even has a name borrowed from the puzzle. It's called a birthday attack. This is why the fingerprints used for security get made so carefully. For the tags that guard passwords and messages and money, the people who designed them try to make the fingerprints long enough that random matches almost never turn up, quick enough to run everywhere, and hard enough that nobody can go fishing for collisions and find one in any reasonable amount of time. These careful ones are called cryptographic hash functions. Collisions still have to exist because the pigeonhole counting never goes away. The goal is only to make them so hard to find on purpose that no one can. These careful fingerprints do a great deal of work. When a file gets downloaded, a fingerprint of it can be checked against the fingerprint it was supposed to have, and if the two match, the file almost certainly arrived whole and unchanged, since even a single flipped bit would throw the fingerprint far off. When a password is stored, a well-built system doesn't keep the password itself at all. It keeps only the password's fingerprint. so that even someone who steals the whole pile of fingerprints can't easily read back the passwords that made them. Because a good fingerprint is desperately hard to run backward. The fingerprint goes one way easily. Coming back the other way, from print to original, is meant to be all but impossible. That one-way quality is the whole reason these fingerprints can guard a secret while sitting in plain sight. Not every fingerprint wants to avoid collisions, though, and this is a nice twist. Some hash functions are built to make similar things collide on purpose. If a computer is trying to spot two songs that sound alike, or two strands of DNA that nearly match, a fingerprint that lands the same for near copies is exactly what's wanted. There, a collision is a feature. It means the two things really are close. Other fingerprints, the ones used to check a file came through unharmed, are tuned the opposite way to keep near copies apart. So the same simple idea, a short tag for a big thing, gets bent one way or the other depending on the job. There's one more everyday place collisions show up, and it's the place fingerprints get used the most. A hash table. Picture a long row of small drawers, and a rule that turns any item's fingerprint into a drawer number, so the item can be filed and found again fast. Most of the time, each item lands in its own drawer. But because collisions must happen, sometimes two different items get sent to the same drawer. The table can't just throw one away, so it has its own ways of coping. One way is to let the drawer hold a little chain of items, all sharing that spot, and to walk down the chain when looking something up. Another way is to nudge the second item along to the next open drawer nearby. And remember, it went there. Either way, the collision gets handled in the background and the table keeps working. Nobody using it ever sees the shuffle. So this is the shape of the second idea. A fingerprint squeezes anything, of any size, down to a short steady tag. That squeezing makes computers fast. It also makes collisions certain, because there are always more things than tags. And the collisions come sooner than instinct says they will. For the same reason a small room of people so often hides a shared birthday. The whole thing is a piece of plain counting, dressed up as a surprise. Those hash tables were called fast. It's worth looking hard at that plain little word, fast, because computer scientists mean something very particular by it, and it's one of the more surprising ideas in the whole field. When most people say a program is fast, they mean it finished quickly on the machine in front of them. That's a fair thing to mean, but it depends on so much. A newer chip, a quiet moment when nothing else was running, a small pile of data instead of a big one. Measure the same program on a different day, on a different computer, and the stopwatch says something else. So computer scientists mostly stopped asking how many seconds a program takes. They started asking a different, steadier question. As the pile of data gets bigger, how much more work does the program have to do? That question doesn't care about the chip or the weather. It's about the shape of the work. There's a special shorthand for talking about that shape. It's called Big O notation. Just the letter O, standing for the German word for order, from an old bit of mathematics worked out by Paul Bachmann and Edmund Landau in the late 1800s. Much later, a computer scientist named Donald Knuth carried it into the study of programs, and it stuck. Today, when programmers talk about how well something scales, Big O is the language they reach for. It throws away the small stuff and keeps only the heart of the matter. It answers one thing: when the data grows, how does the work grow with it? The easiest way to feel the difference is with a phone book. An old paper one, thick with names, sorted from A to Z. Suppose the job is to find one particular person in that book. The dull way is to start at the very first page and read every name in order until the right one turns up. If the name is near the front, that's quick. If it's near the back, it's slow. And here's the important part. If the phone book doubles in size, this way of searching takes about twice as long, because there are about twice as many names to walk past. Double the names, double the work, 10 times the names, 10 times the work. The work grows in lockstep with the pile. Computer scientists call that linear. The work marches in a straight line with the size of the data, but nobody actually searches a phone book that way because the names are sorted, and sorting opens a much cleverer door. Open the book right to the middle. Look at the name there. If the person being hunted comes earlier in the alphabet, the whole back half of the book can be ignored all at once. If they come later, the front half can be thrown away. Either way, one glance cut the problem in half. Then do it again on what's left. Look at the middle, throw away half. Again, half. Again, half. Each look chops the remaining pile in two. This is a wonderful thing to think about, because having again and again gets to the answer astonishingly fast. A phone book of 1,000 names is found in about 10 looks, because 10 havings is enough to whittle 1,000 down to one. A phone book of 1,000,000 names takes only about 20 looks. 1,000,000,000 names, about 30. Each time the book gets 1,000 times bigger, this search only needs about 10 more looks. The pile explodes and the work barely stirs. Computer scientists call that logarithmic, and it's one of the loveliest shapes in computing. The work grows so slowly that enormous piles feel almost the same as small ones. So already there are two very different kinds of fast. There's the search that doubles its work when the data doubles, and there's the search that adds a step or two when the data grows 1,000-fold. On a small phone book, nobody would notice the difference. On a giant one, the difference is the difference between a blink and a lifetime. That's what Big O is really about. It's about what happens when things get big. At the very easy end of this ladder is the best case of all. Some jobs take the same amount of work, no matter how much data there is. Grabbing the first item off a pile, checking whether a light is on or off. It doesn't matter if the pile has 10 things or 10 billion things. The work is fixed. Computer scientists call that constant. The size of the data simply doesn't enter into it. A hash table lookup from the last idea is prized because on a good day, it behaves this way. The fingerprint leads almost straight to the right drawer, no matter how many drawers there are. Then, climbing up comes logarithmic, the halving trick, where huge piles cost only a few extra steps. Then linear, where the work keeps pace with the pile, one for one. There's a rung just above linear, a common one, where a program has to do a linear pass, but also a bit of that halving sorting mixed in, so the work grows a little faster than the pile, but not much. Sorting a list of names into order usually lands right about there. That's the everyday middle of the ladder, and most well behaved programs live somewhere in this range. Now, the ladder starts to get steep, and this is where fast turns into slow. Picture a room full of people at a party, and the job is to have every person shake hands with every other person. Two people, one handshake. Three people, three handshakes. Four people, six. It climbs. Add a 10th person, and the new arrival has to shake 9 hands. The number of handshakes grows much faster than the number of guests because it's about pairs, and pairs pile up quickly, just as they did with birthdays. Double the guests, and the handshakes roughly quadruple. This shape is called quadratic. When the data doubles, the work goes up by about 4 times. A program that compares every item to every other item behaves this way, and on a big pile, it gets heavy in a hurry. 1,000 items means about 1,000,000 comparisons. 1,000,000 items means about 1,000,000,000,000. What felt quick on a small list becomes a slog on a large one, and there's a rung above even that, where things stop being merely heavy and become hopeless. Picture a dinner table, and the job is to try every possible order the guests could be seated in, to find the seating everyone likes best. With 3 guests, there are only a handful of orders. With 4 guests, there are 2 dozen. With 5 guests, 120. With 10 guests, more than 3 million. With a mere 20 guests, the number of possible seatings is larger than the number of seconds since the universe began. Adding one more guest doesn't add a little work, it multiplies the work. This shape is called factorial, and its cousin, exponential, behaves the same terrible way, doubling or worse with every single item added. A program that has to try every combination runs into this wall. For a tiny input, it finishes instantly. For a medium input, it would run past the lifetime of the sun. Not because the computer is slow, because the number of things to try grew faster than any machine could ever keep up with. This ladder is the heart of a whole way of thinking. Constant, where size doesn't matter. Logarithmic, where giant piles cost almost nothing extra. Linear, where the work keeps step with the pile. Quadratic, where doubling the pile quadruples the work. And the runaway shapes, exponential and factorial, where each new item multiplies everything and the work outruns the universe. A program's place on that ladder tells more about how it'll cope with a big job than any stopwatch ever could. There's a habit inside Big O that trips people up at first, and it's a sensible one once you see it. Big O throws away the small stuff on purpose. If a program does a linear amount of work and then a little constant chore on the side, Big O just calls it linear and forgets the chore, because on a big enough pile, the linear part swamps everything else. It doesn't care whether one program is twice as quick as another. Twice is a small constant, and constants wash out when the data gets huge. Big O keeps only the fastest growing part of the work, the part that will dominate once things get big, and drops the rest. It's a deliberately blurry lens. It refuses to sweat the details so it can see the shape. Time isn't the only thing that grows either. There's a second resource that Big O measures just as happily, and that's room, memory. Some methods are quick and greedy, gobbling up more and more space as the pile grows. Others are slow and thrifty, sipping only a little room no matter how big the job. And often there's a trade between the two. A method can be made faster by letting it remember more, keeping a big table of answers it worked out earlier so it never has to work them out twice. Or it can be made leaner by throwing that table away and figuring things out again as needed, paying in time to save on room, fast and roomy, or slow and lean. Big O describes both kinds of growth with the same ladder, and a lot of the craft of writing programs is choosing where on that trade to sit, given how much time there is to spare and how much memory. That blurriness is exactly why it's useful. Two programmers can argue forever about whose code is a hair quicker on today's laptop. Big O steps back from all of that and asks the only question that survives when the data grows 1,000-fold. And usually, that's the question that decides whether a program keeps working as the world piles more and more onto it or falls over. A slow-looking program with a gentle shape will sail past a fast-looking one with a steep shape. The moment the pile gets large enough, fast, it turns out, isn't about the stopwatch at all. It's about the shape of the growing. There's one more quirk that lives inside a single machine before the story moves on to what happens when machines have to work together. It's about tidying up, and it has one of those steep shapes hiding in its history. Every running program needs scratch space, room to put the things it's working with. A picture being edited, a list of names, a half-written message. The program asks the machine for a little patch of memory, uses it, and then, at some point, doesn't need it anymore. And here's the problem. If nobody ever hands that memory back, the program keeps asking for more, and the machine slowly fills up with stuff nobody is using until there's no room left and everything grinds to a halt. So the memory that's finished being used has to be given back. That leftover, finished with memory even has a homely name. It's called garbage. For a long time, handing the garbage back was the programmer's own job, done by hand. Use a patch of memory, then remember to give it back once it's finished with. And that sounds simple, and it's the source of some of the most maddening bugs in all of software. Give a patch back too early, while some other part of the program still thinks it's using it, and that other part is now scribbling in a room that's been handed to someone else. Give the same patch back twice by mistake, and the bookkeeping gets tangled. Forget to give a patch back at all, and it sits there, used up and abandoned, slowly eating the machine's memory until the program runs out. These bugs are slippery because they often don't show up right where the mistake was made. they show up later, somewhere else, wearing a disguise. So, a long time ago, a computer scientist named John McCarthy came up with a way to take the whole chore off the programmer's hands. Around 1959, working on a language called Lisp, he built the first system that would tidy up the memory automatically. It would look around, find the patches nobody was using anymore, and reclaim them all on its own while the program ran. This automatic tidying is called garbage collection, and today it's built into a great many of the languages people write in. The programmer just uses memory and stops thinking about it. A housekeeper running in the background notices which rooms are empty and clears them out. The trick, of course, is deciding which rooms are truly empty. And there are two main ways to figure it out, both of them rather elegant. The first way is to keep a tally. Every batch of memory keeps a little count of how many parts of the program are currently pointing at it, currently holding a key to that room. When a new part starts using it, the count goes up. When a part finishes and lets go, the count goes down. And the moment that count drops to zero, when the last key is handed back and nobody at all is holding the room anymore, the housekeeper knows it's safe to clear it. This way is called reference counting, and it's tidy and prompt. Rooms get cleared the instant the last person leaves. But reference counting has a soft spot, and it's a strange one to picture. Imagine two rooms, and inside each room is the only key to the other. Nobody else in the whole building holds a key to either room. From outside, both rooms are clearly abandoned. No one can ever get into them because the only keys are locked inside each other. But the tally never reaches zero. Each room still holds one key, so each one still counts as occupied, and the housekeeper, going only by the counts, leaves them both alone forever. Two useless rooms, propping each other up, never cleared. This tangle is called a cycle, and reference counting alone can't see it. Systems that use counting have to add a special extra check that goes looking for these little rings of rooms that only hold each other and clears them out by hand. The second way of finding empty rooms skips the tallies and does something more sweeping. It starts from a few rooms it knows are in use right now, the ones the program is actively standing in, and it follows every key from there. Every room those rooms hold a key to, and every room those rooms hold a key to, on and on, marking each one as reachable. When it's followed, every chain of keys as far as it goes, anything it never reached must be garbage, because there's no way to get to it from where the program actually is. Then it clears all the unmarked rooms in one pass. This way is called tracing, and it doesn't get fooled by the two rooms holding each other's keys, because if there's no path to them from the program's real position, they get swept up no matter what keys they hold inside. Tracing is the more common of the two, so much so that when people say garbage collection, tracing is usually what they mean. Now, all this automatic tidying is a wonderful convenience. It erases whole families of those slippery bugs. The programmer can't free a room too early, or free it twice, or forget to free it, because they're not the one doing the freeing anymore. But the convenience isn't free, and this is the catch. The housekeeper takes time and space to do the job. It has to think about which rooms are empty, and that thinking uses up some of the very resources it's trying to manage. One careful study found that a program leaning on automatic collection might need around 5 times as much memory to keep pace with the same program where a perfect, all knowing hand freed every room at exactly the right moment. That's the price of not having to think about it. More room so the housekeeper has slack to work in. And there's a second catch, easier to describe, but sometimes the one that really bites. The housekeeper doesn't tidy on a schedule anyone can predict. It cleans when it decides the time is right. And in some systems, when it settles in to do a big cleanup, it asks the whole program to hold still for a moment while it works, so nothing moves the furniture around mid-sweep. Everything freezes. Then the sweep finishes and the program carries on. Most of the time, these pauses are so short nobody notices. But every so often one lands at an awkward moment and the program hitches just for a breath, for no reason the person watching could ever guess. This freeze even has a plain, slightly funny name: stopping the world. For most software, a brief stop of the world is fine. For a program that has to react right now, this instant, an unpredictable freeze can be a real problem, which is one reason some devices deliberately don't use this kind of automatic tidying at all. The steep shapes from a moment ago haunt this corner of computing too. On some early home computers, like the Altair, a program juggling a lot of little pieces of text could suddenly freeze for a startling length of time while the housekeeper worked, because the tidying method it used had one of those punishing shapes where the work climbed with the square of the mess. A small pile cleaned up in a blink. A big pile could pause the whole machine for seconds, even minutes, while the person sat there wondering what had gone wrong. Nothing had gone wrong. The housekeeper was just doing a job whose work grew far faster than the pile did. Later collectors were rebuilt with gentler shapes, and the long freezes mostly went away. There's a lovely observation buried in the modern versions. People who study these things noticed that most patches of memory die young. A program grabs a little scratch space, uses it for a heartbeat, and lets it go almost immediately. Only a few things stick around for the long haul. So the cleverer housekeepers watch the young rooms closely, sweeping through them often, since that's where nearly all the garbage is, and they mostly leave the old, settled rooms alone, since whatever has survived that long will probably keep surviving. It's a simple, human sort of wisdom turned into a way of tidying a machine. Look hardest where the mess is freshest. And with that, the story leaves the single machine behind, because everything so far has happened inside one computer, minding its own business. Something stranger starts the moment more than one machine has to agree. The moment two things happen at the same time, a new kind of trouble appears, and it's one of the sneakiest in all of computing, because the trouble isn't in the steps, it's in the timing between them. Picture two roommates who share a fridge. There's a simple rule in the house. If the milk runs out, whoever notices buys more. One evening, the first roommate opens the fridge, sees the milk is gone, and heads to the store. A few minutes later, before the first one is back, the second roommate opens the same fridge, also sees no milk, and also heads to the store. Both of them did exactly the right thing. Both followed the rule perfectly. And now there are 2 cartons of milk. Nothing was broken. No one made a mistake. The only problem was the timing. Each one checked the fridge before the other had finished acting on what they saw. That's a race condition, a situation where the outcome depends on the exact timing of things that nobody is really controlling, and where at least one of the possible outcomes is one nobody wanted. The name is old. It was already in use by 1954 in the doctoral work of a researcher named David Huffman, and it turns up anywhere 2 things run side by side and touch the same shared thing. Inside a computer, the classic version is even simpler than the milk and worth walking through because it's the whole idea in miniature. Imagine a single number stored in memory, a running tally, and 2 little workers, each told to add 1 to it. Adding 1 sounds like a single act, but underneath, it's really 3 tiny steps. Read the current number. Add 1 to it off to the side. Write the new number back. 3 steps done in order. Now suppose the tally starts at 5 and both workers are supposed to add 1, so it should end at 7. If they take turns politely, that's exactly what happens. The first worker reads 5, adds 1, writes 6. The second worker reads 6, adds 1, writes 7. Lovely. But suppose instead they overlap the way the roommates did. The first worker reads 5 before it can write anything. The second worker also reads 5 because that's still what's stored. Now both of them are holding the number 5 in their heads. The first worker adds 1 and writes 6. The second worker adds 1 to its 5 and also writes 6. 2 additions happened. The tally went up by 1. It should have gone up by 2, and one of the additions simply vanished with no error and no warning. The number is just wrong. The fix has a plain name and a plain idea behind it: mutual exclusion. It means drawing a little rope around the delicate part, the part where the shared number gets read and written, and making a rule that only one worker may be inside the rope at a time. The first worker steps inside, reads 5, adds 1, writes 6, and only then steps out. Now the second worker steps in, reads 6, adds 1, writes 7. The rope forces them to take turns through the tender moment, so no update can be lost. The space inside the rope has a name too. It's called the critical section. The idea is old and simple. Where something shared is being changed, let only one hand touch it at a time. The maddening thing about race conditions is that they hide, because everything depends on timing, and timing shifts from run to run. The same program might work fine 1,000 times and then go wrong on the 1,001st, when 2 things happen to line up just so. And here's the part that drives people who chase these bugs a little mad. The very act of looking for the bug can make it disappear. When a programmer adds notes to watch what the program is doing, or slows it down to peer inside. The timing changes. The two things stop overlapping in that unlucky way, and the bug politely refuses to show up. It vanishes the instant anyone tries to observe it, and comes back the moment they stop. There's a name for this kind of bug that hides whenever it's watched, borrowed from physics, where looking at something can change it. It's called a Heisenbug. It's a small joke, but it captures a real and slippery frustration. Because they hide so well, race conditions can lurk in a system for a long time, looking perfectly reliable, and then surface at the worst possible moment. A few times, they've surfaced in places where the stakes were very high, and those stories are worth telling plainly. One was a radiation therapy machine, the Theric 25, used to treat cancer patients. Among its flaws was a race condition. Under certain timing, if an operator typed the settings quickly in a particular way, two parts of the machine's software got out of step with each other, and the machine could deliver a massive overdose of radiation while the screen showed everything as normal. At least three patients died, and others were badly hurt. The steps in the software weren't wrong on their own. It was the timing between them under fast typing that opened the gap. Another surfaced across a whole continent. In the summer of 2003, a large stretch of North America lost electricity in what became known as the Great Blackout. Part of what let the local problem spread so far was a race condition buried in the software that watched over the power grid. When three power lines sagged and tripped in close succession, the alarm system, caught by the unlucky timing, failed to raise the warning it should have. The people monitoring the grid didn't learn there was trouble until it was much bigger. The alarm hadn't been designed to fail. It just had a tender moment where two things happening close together could slip through, and one day they did. Not every race condition is a disaster though, and that's worth keeping in mind. Most of them are small. A counter off by one, a window that flickers, a phone that answers a call by accident because a tap landed in the wrong instant while it was busy doing something else. That last one is a real everyday race condition. The same idea as the milk and the tally, just wearing ordinary clothes. Two things happened close together, and their order decided the outcome. Race conditions even show up outside computers entirely, which is a good reminder that the idea is really about time and coordination, not silicon. In old railway signaling, there was a rule where, if a train was stopped at a signal, the fireman would walk to the signal box to remind the signalman the train was waiting. But if the signalman let another train through before the fireman arrived, two trains could end up on the same stretch of track. That's a race condition made of people and footsteps. And researchers studying the brain have found something similar inside our own heads, where one set of nerve pathways is busy carrying out a planned movement, while another set is trying to cancel it. And which one wins can come down to timing. The same shape again and again, two things unfolding side by side, and the answer hanging on which one gets there first. The deep lesson is simple and a little humbling. When two things run at the same time and share anything at all, the individual steps can each be perfectly correct, and the whole can still come out wrong, purely because of when things happen to line up. There's nothing to point at and call the mistake. The mistake is in the timing, and timing is the one thing hardest to pin down, which is why so much careful thought in computing goes into drawing those little ropes, marking off the tender moments, and making sure that where something shared is being touched, only one hand touches it at a time. Drawing those little ropes solves one problem and opens the door to another. Once things have to wait their turn for what they share, they can end up waiting forever. Not because anything crashed, because everyone is politely waiting for everyone else in a ring, and the ring never breaks. This is called deadlock, and there's a picture for it so tidy and so memorable that it's taught to nearly every computer science student in the world. It's a dinner party. It was dreamed up in 1965 by a computer scientist named Edsger Dijkstra, at first as a puzzle about machines fighting over tape drives, and then it was reshaped into its famous form by another computer scientist, Tony Hoare. It goes like this: 5 philosophers sit around a round table. In front of each one is a plate of spaghetti. Between each plate and the next, there is a single fork, so there are 5 forks, one resting between every pair of neighbors. The spaghetti is the slippery kind that takes 2 forks to eat, one in each hand. Each philosopher spends their evening doing just 2 things: thinking and eating. When a philosopher gets hungry, they need to pick up both the fork on their left and the fork on their right. Only with both forks can they eat. When they've eaten their fill, they put both forks back down and return to thinking. That's the whole life of a philosopher at this table. Think, get hungry, pick up 2 forks, eat, put them down, think again. Now, here's the trouble. Each fork sits between 2 philosophers, and only one of them can hold it at a time. So, a philosopher can eat only when both neighbors happen to be thinking with their forks down. The puzzle is to come up with a set of rules, a plan every philosopher follows, so that all 5 can keep going forever, each one getting to eat now and then, nobody left hungry. The most natural plan a person might think of is this: when a philosopher gets hungry, they wait until the fork on their left is free and pick it up. Then they wait until the fork on their right is free and pick it up. Now they have both. They eat, they put the left one down, put the right one down, and go back to thinking. It sounds perfectly reasonable. Each philosopher just grabs the left fork, then the right, then eats. But imagine the unlucky moment when all 5 get hungry together. Each of them reaches out and picks up the fork on their left. Now, every philosopher is holding exactly 1 fork, the left one, and every single fork on the table is in someone's hand. Each philosopher is now waiting for the fork on their right, but the fork on their right is the left fork of their neighbor, and their neighbor is holding it tight, waiting for their own right fork. Around the whole table, every philosopher waits for the person beside them, who waits for the person beside them, all the way around the ring and back. No one will ever put a fork down, because no one can eat, because no one can get a second fork. They will sit there, forks in hand, waiting politely, forever. Nothing crashed. Everyone followed the rules, and the whole table is frozen. That's deadlock. The lovely thing about this little dinner is that it lays bare exactly what a deadlock needs in order to happen. Back in 1971, a researcher named Edward Kaufman wrote down 4 conditions, and it turns out all 4 have to be true at the same time for a deadlock to lock in. Take away any one of them, and the freeze can't happen. The first condition is that the shared things can be shared at the same instant. Only one philosopher can hold a given fork at a time. That's the rope from before, the mutual exclusion. The second is holding while waiting. A philosopher who has picked up one fork keeps holding it while waiting for the next one. They don't let go of what they have while they wait for more. The third is that nobody can snatch. No philosopher is allowed to reach over and yank a fork out of a neighbor's hand. A fork only becomes free when the one holding it chooses to set it down. Nothing gets taken by force. The fourth is the ring. Each philosopher is waiting on the next, who is waiting on the next, in a closed circle, with no beginning and no end. That circle of waiting is the heart of the trap. All 4 together, and the table freezes. And the beauty is that breaking just one of the 4 sets everyone free. So every real solution to the dinner is really just a clever way to knock out one of those 4 conditions. One solution knocks out the ring. Number the forks 1 through 5 going around the table. Make a new rule. Everybody always picks up the lower numbered of their 2 forks first, then the higher one. For most of the philosophers, this changes nothing much. But for one of them, the 2 forks straddle the wraparound. So this rule turns them into a kind of left-handed diner, reaching for the other side first. And that one difference is enough. With that one philosopher reaching in the opposite order, the perfect circle of waiting can never close. If everyone gets hungry together and grabs their lower fork, one fork gets left on the table, and somebody can always pick up their second fork and eat. Break the ring, and the freeze can't form. It's an imperfectly fair rule, and it doesn't work well when things can't be numbered ahead of time, and it does keep the table alive. Another solution knocks out the holding while waiting. Make a rule that a philosopher must pick up both forks together in one motion or neither, never one fork alone, sitting there waiting for the second. If both forks aren't free, the philosopher waits empty-handed and grabs nothing. Since nobody ever sits holding a single fork, the trap can't build. Another solution brings in a waiter. Before any philosopher may pick up forks, they have to ask the waiter's permission, and the waiter only lets one person reach for forks at a time, and only when they can get both. The waiter watches the whole table and simply never lets the dangerous pattern form. The cost is that the waiter becomes a bottleneck. Sometimes philosophers who could safely eat have to wait their turn for the waiter's blessing, and there's a wonderfully simple solution. Just take one chair away. Let only four of the five philosophers sit at the table at any moment, and make the fifth wait off to decide until someone gets up. With only four diners squeezing around five forks, there's always a spare fork somewhere, so at least one philosopher can always get both and eat. The line keeps moving. That one is almost funny in how plain it is. If 5 is the number that jams seat 4, real computers face this exact puzzle all the time, just without the spaghetti. Swap the philosophers for programs and the forks for shared things the programs need, files or chunks of memory or connections, and the whole story replays. Two programs, each grab one thing and then reach for a second thing the other is holding, and both sit there forever, each waiting on the other. Which is why computer people spend real effort on the four conditions and how to break one. They handle it in a few different ways, and one of them is charming. Some systems just decide to ignore the whole problem on the bet that a real deadlock will almost never happen, and if it does, the damage is small enough to shrug off. This approach even has a nickname borrowed from a bird that supposedly buries its head in the sand. It's called the ostrich method. Do nothing, look away, hope it doesn't come up. And for many everyday systems, that's a reasonable bet because true deadlocks really are rare. Other systems watch for deadlock actively, let it happen, notice when the ring has formed, and then break it by force, usually by picking one stuck program and shutting it down or making it back up and start over so the others can move again. It's a bit brutal, sacrificing one to save the rest, but it works. And still other systems try to prevent the freeze from ever forming by refusing any request for a shared thing that might lead the system toward that closed circle of waiting. They think a step ahead and only hand out what's safe. Spotting a deadlock gets harder still when the waiting is spread across many machines that can't see inside one another and can only send messages back and forth. A note about who's holding what can arrive late, and by the time it lands, the picture it paints may already be out of date. So a watcher piecing the whole situation together from these delayed messages can sometimes see a deadlock that isn't really there, a ring of waiting that had already broken by the time the news arrived. These false alarms even have a name: phantom deadlocks. A freeze that looks real from a distance, in messages that took too long to travel and turns out to be nothing at all once the truth catches up. There's a cousin of deadlock that's stranger and subtler, and it's worth a moment because it captures a very human kind of stuckness. In deadlock, everyone freezes in place. In its cousin, everyone keeps moving, and still nobody gets anywhere. Picture two people meeting in a narrow hallway, face to face. One steps to the left to let the other pass, but the other steps to their right, which is the same side, so they're still blocking each other. So the first steps back to the right, and the other, at the very same moment, steps back to their left, and they're blocking each other again. Both of them are moving. Both are trying to be polite, and they could shuffle side to side like that forever, never colliding, never passing. That's called live lock. The states keep changing. Everyone stays busy, and no real progress is ever made. The name was coined in 1975 by a researcher named Edward Ashcroft while looking at airline booking systems. Deadlock is a frozen jam. Livelock is a frantic one. Both leave everyone exactly where they started. What makes all of this beautiful is how ordinary it feels once it comes into view. The philosophers aren't doing anything wrong. The programs aren't doing anything wrong. The two people in the hallway are trying their best to be kind. The trouble comes purely from everyone reaching for shared things in the wrong pattern at the wrong time, each one waiting on the other in a ring that won't break on its own. And the fix is never to make anyone smarter or faster. It's just to break the ring some small way. Take a fork, take a chair, bring in a waiter, agree on an order, one little change, and five hungry philosophers who would have sat frozen till the end of time get to eat and think and eat again. So far, the shared things have been small and close. One fork, one file, one number in memory. Now widen the picture. Suppose the shared thing is a whole record book, and copies of it are kept on several machines spread across the world, so that no matter where a person is, there's a copy nearby to answer them quickly. This is how a lot of big systems work. Many copies of the same information kept on many machines, all trying to stay in step. And there's a plain, proven limit on what such a system can promise, and it's one of the plainest truths in computing. To feel it, forget computers for a moment and picture two libraries in two different towns that keep matching copies of the same ledger. Whenever someone changes a record in one library, the change is supposed to be phoned over to the other library, so both books always say the same thing. On a normal day, this works beautifully. A change made in one town reaches the other in a blink, and anyone who walks into either library sees the same up-to-date record. Now, three nice things are true when the phone line between the towns is working. The first is that both books agree. Whoever walks in whichever town, gets the same answer, the latest answer. Call that agreement. The second is that either library will always answer a question right away. Walk in, ask, get a response. Call that answering. And the third is that the two libraries can survive the phone line going down between them and keep serving their own towns. Call that surviving the cutoff. On a good day, all three hold together. Agreement, answering, and surviving the cutoff. Here's the catch, and it's the whole point. One day, the phone line between the towns goes dead. A storm, a cut cable, it doesn't matter. Now the two libraries can't talk to each other. And in that moment, someone walks into the first library and wants to change a record or read one that might have just changed in the other town. The librarian is stuck with a hard choice, and there's no way to dodge it. The librarian can refuse to answer until the phone line comes back. Say plainly that they can't be sure their copy is up to date, so they'd rather give no answer than a possibly wrong one. That keeps the two books in perfect agreement, because nobody is allowed to change or trust anything while they're out of touch. But it means the library has stopped answering. It's chosen agreement over answering. Or the librarian can go ahead and answer from their own copy and accept a change into their own book, knowing the other town has no idea yet. That keeps the library answering, always helpful, always open. But now the two books might silently disagree because a change happened in one town that the other hasn't heard about. It's chosen answering over agreement. There's no third door. While the line is down, the librarian can keep the books in agreement or keep answering, but not both. This is the heart of what's called the CAP theorem, named for the computer scientist Eric Brewer, who first laid it out in the autumn of 1998 and presented it a couple of years later. In 2002, two researchers at MIT, Seth Gilbert and Nancy Lynch, worked out a formal proof which turned Brewer's idea from a strong hunch into a settled fact. The three things it names are agreement between all the copies, answering every request, and surviving a break in the network. And its verdict is that a system spread across machines can fully promise only two of those three at the same time. The reason one of the three usually gets decided ahead of time is that breaks in the network aren't optional. Cables get cut, signals get lost. Any system spread across distance has to expect the line to go down sometimes. So surviving the cutoff is more a fact of life than a choice, which leaves the real decision as the one the librarian faced. When the line is down, keep everyone in agreement or keep answering. That's the trade every distributed system has to make, and different systems make it differently on purpose. Some systems are built to guard agreement above all. A bank moving money, for instance, would rather stop and show an error than let two branches disagree about how much is in an account. Better to say please try again than to hand out a wrong balance. Other systems are built to keep answering above all. A giant website showing posts or product pages would rather show a slightly stale copy, a version that's a few seconds behind, than show nothing at all. A moment out of date is fine there. Nobody is harmed if a like count is a little behind. So the same limit gets answered two opposite ways, depending on what the system can't afford to get wrong. It helps to be clear about what this limit does not say, because it's easy to overstate. On a normal day, with the network healthy, a system really can have all three together: agreement, answering, and the ability to weather a future cutoff altogether. The hard choice only appears in the moment the network actually breaks. Brewer himself pointed this out years later, saying the neat phrase, pick two of three, is a little misleading because the sacrifice only has to be made during an actual break, and systems have clever ways to patch things up once the line comes back. The limit isn't a punishment that hangs over every second. It's a fork in the road that only appears when the connection is lost. And people kept building on the idea. A later refinement pointed out that even when the network is perfectly healthy, there's still a subtler trade hiding underneath between how fast the system answers and how sure it is that the answer is the very latest. To double check with every distant copy before replying takes time. To reply quickly means replying before every distant copy has been heard from. So even on a good day, there's a small tug between speed and certainty. But the core picture is the one with the two libraries and the dead phone line. When machines are spread across distance and the connection between them fails, someone has to choose keep everyone agreeing or keep everyone answering. The choice can be avoided, only made on purpose, ahead of time, by whoever builds the thing. Everything so far has been about machines that fall out of step by accident. A line goes down. Two things overlap in an unlucky moment. Nobody is being dishonest. Now comes a harder kind of trouble, and it's one of the deepest ideas in this whole field. What happens when one of the machines isn't just silent, but wrong, and worse, when it tells different lies to different neighbors, so that the honest machines can't even agree on what the broken one said? There's a famous story for this, and like the philosophers at their table, it's a story people reach for because it makes the idea plain. Picture an old army in the days of messengers on horseback surrounding a walled city. The army is split into several camps, each led by a general, and the camps are spread out around the walls, so they can't just shout to each other. They can only send messages by riders going back and forth. The generals have to agree on one plan. Either everyone attacks together or everyone pulls back together. And the thing that makes it dangerous is that a half-hearted attack where only some camps charge and the rest hold back is the worst outcome of all. Worse than attacking together and worse than retreating together. So agreement isn't just nice, it's everything. They all have to land on the same choice. If every general were honest and every rider reliable, this would be easy. Send the votes around, count them up, follow the majority. But the story adds the twist that makes it hard. Some of the generals are traitors, and a traitor doesn't just vote for the wrong plan. A traitor can be cunning about it. A treacherous general can tell the camps that favor attacking that he too says attack, while telling the camps that favor retreat that he says retreat. He whispers one thing to one neighbor and the opposite to another on purpose, so that the honest generals come away with different tallies and never notice they disagree. Half the honest camps think the plan is attack. The other half think the plan is retreat. And the traitor sits back while the coordinated plan falls apart. That's the shape of the hardest failure in distributed computing. It's called a Byzantine fault, after the old empire in that story, and a system that can keep working in spite of it is said to have Byzantine fault tolerance. The name for the failure came about in a slightly funny way. The researcher, who dressed the problem up as a fable, first cast it with generals from a real country, then changed it to the long-gone Byzantine Empire at a colleague's suggestion, so as not to offend anyone still around to take offense. A vanished empire can't complain. Now, the word traitor makes it sound like this is all about enemies and spies, and that's worth clearing up, because the truth is plainer. A Byzantine fault doesn't need a villain at all. It just means a part of the system that behaves in an arbitrary, inconsistent way, showing one face to one observer and a different face to another. And that can happen with no ill intent whatsoever. A failing sensor feeding a slightly different bad reading to two different instruments. A chip with a fault that makes it send a message that looks correct to one machine and garbled to the next. A wire carrying a voltage that's neither clearly on nor clearly off, so that machines reading it disagree about what it even said. The failure is called Byzantine because it acts like a two-faced traitor, telling different stories to different listeners. But the cause underneath is often just an ordinary, broken part, doing something strange and inconsistent, because that's what broken parts sometimes do. That's what makes it the hardest kind of fault to handle. A machine that simply dies is easy because everyone can see it's gone quiet. A machine that keeps talking but says different things to different neighbors and looks perfectly healthy to some of them is a nightmare to pin down. This problem was worked out carefully a long time ago, back in the late 1970s, by a small group of researchers at a lab called SRI International on a project paid for by the American Space Agency to build flight computers reliable enough to trust with lives. The names worth remembering are Robert Shostak, who first framed the puzzle, Marshall Pease, who worked out the general answer, and Leslie Lamport, who gave it the story of the generals that made it famous. And what they found is one of those clean, surprising limits that this field is full of. Here is the surprising part. To be sure, the honest machines can always reach agreement in spite of one two-faced liar among them. Plain messages aren't enough unless the honest ones comfortably outnumber the liars. In fact, if the machines can only pass along ordinary messages that could be faked, the total number of them has to be more than 3 times the number of traitors. Put another way, the liars have to be fewer than a third of everyone. If even a third of the group is faulty in this two-faced way, the honest majority can be split and fooled, and no amount of talking will let them be certain they agree. There is a tiny version of this that shows exactly why. Imagine just 3 generals, and one of them is the two-faced one, but nobody knows which. If the leader is the traitor, he can tell one follower attack and the other retreat. The 2 honest followers then compare notes, each passing along what they heard. But now each honest follower is holding 2 conflicting messages, one from the leader and one from the other follower, and there's no way for them to tell who's lying. Maybe the leader is the traitor, or maybe the other follower is the traitor, lying about what the leader said. From the honest follower's seat, those 2 stories look identical. With only 3, and one of them false, the honest 2 can never be sure. It takes more than 3 times the traitors to break the tie every time. Add enough honest voices, and the liar can no longer split them, because the honest ones, comparing all their notes, will always find a solid majority telling the same true story. There's a way to do better, and it's a nice one. If the messages can be sealed in a way that can't be faked, a kind of unbreakable wax seal, so that a general can prove a message really came from who it claims, then a two-faced general can't tell one camp, he said, attack and swear to another, he said, retreat, because the sealed message is right there for anyone to check. Sealing the messages ties the liar's hands. He can still refuse to send or send nonsense, but he can't send two different signed stories and get away with it. With that kind of proof in play, far fewer honest machines are needed to stay safe. So, a lot of the work in this corner of computing is about exactly that, making messages that can be forged so that the two-faced trick stops working. For a long time, this was a beautiful idea that seemed too slow and heavy to use in the real world. Then, near the end of the 1990s, two researchers named Miguel Castro and Barbara Liskov worked out a way to do it fast enough to be practical, handling many requests a second without much delay. That opened the door to using this kind of hard-won agreement in real systems, and it's at work in more places than most people would guess. It rides in the sky, for one. Some airliners use this kind of agreement in the computers that help fly them, exactly because a single instrument going two-faced could be deadly. So the plane runs several and makes them agree, throwing out the odd voice that disagrees with the solid majority. Spacecraft use it too, for the same reason. And there's a real example that shows it isn't about spies at all. During long endurance testing of a newly built submarine, engineers saw these strange Byzantine faults crop up now and then, rarely and at odd moments, with no enemy anywhere, just hardware occasionally behaving in that maddening, inconsistent way. That's the whole point of building the tolerance in. Nobody's expecting a traitor. It's just that, given enough parts running long enough, one of them will eventually start telling different stories to different neighbors, all on its own, and the system has to shrug it off and carry on. The deep truth here is simple and a little humbling, the same shape as the generals. A group can only stay of one mind through a two-faced member if the honest members are a strong enough majority, comfortably more than two-thirds. Below that, a single well-placed liar, whether a scheming general or just a broken chip, can split the honest into camps that each believe they agree with everyone, while disagreeing with half the room. It's a limit no cleverness gets around, only outvoted. Gather enough honest voices, and the liar drowns. Gather too few, and the liar wins, without ever raising his. The generals in that story were really after one thing, and it's a thing worth naming on its own because it sits under an enormous amount of modern computing. They wanted to agree on the same answer, whatever it happened to be, so they could act as one. Landing on the right answer wasn't really the point. Landing on the same answer was everything. Getting a group of separate machines to settle on a single shared value when some of them might fail is called the consensus problem, and it's among the most studied puzzles in the field. It sounds almost too plain to be hard. Get everyone to agree on one number, and yet it hides a proven wall that no cleverness climbs over. First, what agreement even has to mean here, because the plain word hides some careful rules. A good way for a group of machines to agree has to do a few things. Everyone who's still working has to eventually decide on something so the group can't just hang forever with no answer. Everyone who's still working has to decide on the same something, because a split answer is the whole thing they're trying to avoid. And the answer they land on has to be one that somebody actually put forward, not some fixed default baked in ahead of time. That last rule matters more than it looks. A group that always answers the number one, no matter what anyone suggests, technically agrees every time. And it's completely useless because the answer means nothing. The answer has to depend on what the members actually proposed. And once a decision is made, it's final. No taking it back. Now, for why this turns out to be hard. Two things can go wrong with a member. The mild way is a crash. A machine simply stops and never comes back. It goes quiet and stays quiet. The harsh way is the two-faced Byzantine failure from before, where a machine keeps talking but says wrong or conflicting things. The crash seems like the easy case, the polite failure. A machine either answers or it doesn't. And here is one of the most beautiful and unsettling results in all of computer science. Even in that mild case, even when the worst a machine can do is simply stop, agreement can't be guaranteed. Not always. Not in a fixed amount of time. There's a proof of it, and it's a deep thing to think about. The proof came in 1985 from three researchers named Fisher, Lynch, and Patterson, and it's known by their initials. What they showed is this. Imagine a group of machines passing messages, and imagine that messages can take any amount of time to arrive. No guaranteed speed. A message might come in an instant, or it might take an hour, or a day, with no upper limit anyone can count on. That's not a strange assumption. Real networks are like this. A message can be delayed for reasons nobody controls. And in a world like that, they proved there is no method, no clever set of steps that can promise the whole group will always reach agreement in a bounded amount of time, if even a single machine might crash. The reason cuts right to the bone, and it's a lovely thing to picture. Suppose a machine goes silent. The others are waiting to hear from it. And here's the trap. There is no way to tell the difference between a machine that has crashed and gone silent forever and a machine that's simply being slow, whose message is still on its way and will arrive eventually. From the outside, a dead member and a very slow member look exactly the same. Both are just silence. So the group faces an impossible choice. Wait longer in case the silent one is only slow, and risk waiting forever if it's actually dead. Or give up on the silent one and decide without it, and risk being wrong if it wasn't dead at all, only slow, and was about to send something that changes everything. There's no way to always choose right, because there's no way to tell slow from dead. That single, ordinary uncertainty, the inability to tell a pause from an ending, is enough to make guaranteed agreement impossible. It's important to say what this proof does and doesn't claim, because it's easy to hear it too darkly. It does not say these machines can never agree. In fact, they agree all the time, constantly, in the systems people use every day. What it says is narrower and stranger. No method can promise to always reach agreement within a set amount of time in that fully uncertain world. There will always be some unlucky pattern of delays, however rare, that could keep the group hanging. In real life, those patterns almost never come up, and when a run stalls, another try usually settles it. The wall isn't a locked door. It's more like a warning that the door can't be guaranteed to open on schedule every single time, no matter how good the method. So real systems have to agree somehow in spite of this wall, and they lean on the fact that the unlucky patterns are rare and they use some clever tricks to stay on the good side of the odds. One common trick is to pick a leader. Instead of everyone shouting proposals together, the group elects one member to gather everyone's suggestions, choose one, and announce it, and the others simply follow along and confirm. It's the same instinct as a committee appointing a chairperson to keep a meeting from turning into noise. If the leader crashes, the group notices the silence, waits a decent while, and picks a new leader and carries on. The most famous methods built this way have plain names, and they run inside a huge share of the world's large systems, keeping many copies of the same records in step across many machines. They handle the mild crash failure, where a machine just stops, and they lean on a leader to keep things moving. They don't try to survive the two-faced liar, because that costs much more. For a great many systems, guarding against honest crashes is enough. There's another trick for slipping past the wall, and it's a charming one. Add a little randomness. The wall stands firmest when every machine behaves in a fixed, predictable way, because then an unlucky pattern of delays can steer the whole group into indecision forever. But if the machines are allowed to flip a coin now and then, to break ties at random, the unlucky patterns lose their grip. No fixed schedule of delays can keep outsmarting a group that keeps making small random choices. Methods like these can't promise to finish by any exact deadline, since the wall still forbids that, and they can promise to finish eventually, with a chance of hanging that shrinks toward nothing the longer they run. A coin flip, of all things, turns out to be a way around one of the deepest walls in the field, just by refusing to stand still in front of it. There is a lovely, everyday example of consensus running in the background of something people do for fun. In a lot of online strategy games, where several players share one battlefield, every player's machine has to agree moment to moment on the exact state of the game, or the whole thing falls apart. So each move a player makes gets sent to all the others, along with a short fingerprint of the entire game as that player sees it. Everyone applies the move, then checks whether their fingerprints match. As long as the fingerprints all agree, everyone is seeing the same game and play goes on. But if one player's fingerprint drifts out of line with the rest, their view of the game has somehow gone different from everyone else's, and the group votes them out and drops them from the match. Players even have a word for it when this happens, a desync. It's the consensus problem, running live in a game, keeping every player honest about the shared world. There's one more wrinkle worth a mention, because it explains a corner of computing a lot of people have heard of without knowing this was underneath. All the classic thinking about agreement assumed a fixed known group, a closed room of members who all know each other. But some systems wanted agreement in an open crowd where anyone at all can wander in and take part, with no one checking who they are. And that opens a nasty door. In an open crowd, A single sneaky person can pretend to be thousands of members by spinning up thousands of fake identities and simply outvote everyone honest. It's called a Sybil attack, after a famous case of one person with many names, and it wrecks the whole idea of majority rule because the majority can be faked. The answer some open systems came up with is to make taking part cost something real, something that can't be faked by making copies. In one well-known approach, members have to burn real computing effort solving hard puzzles to earn a say, so that faking 1,000 members would take 1,000 times the work. That way, the vote is weighted by effort spent, and no one can conjure a majority out of thin air. It's a clever, expensive fix for the problem of agreeing with strangers who might not be who they claim, and it's the engine humming under a lot of the digital money people talk about. Underneath all of it, though, sits that deep wall from 1985, a group of separate machines passing messages that might be slow or might be silent, can't be promised to always agree in a fixed time, because a pause and an ending look the same from the outside. Everything else, the leaders, the votes, the fingerprints, the costly puzzles, is a way of living gracefully alongside that wall, staying on the lucky side of it almost always, while knowing it's still there. Agreement, it turns out, is something a group of machines earns over and over, never something they can take for granted. The walls in this field aren't all about failure and delay. Some of them are about what a tool simply cannot do, no matter how clever the hand that wields it. And those are the cleanest walls of all, because they're just plain facts about the shape of a problem. Here's a small, beautiful one, and it hides inside a tool that millions of people use every day without ever meeting its edge. The tool is the pattern. When someone searches a document for every phone number, or every word spelled two different ways, or every line that starts with a capital letter, they're often using a thing called a regular expression. It's a tiny language for describing a shape of text, a stretchy, general pattern that many different words might fit, instead of one exact word. It grew out of the work of a mathematician named Stephen Cole Kleene around the early 1950s, who was studying simple models of computing, and it moved into everyday use when a programmer named Ken Thompson built it into a text editor, which led in time to a famous little search tool whose name is an old command spelled out. Search everywhere for a regular expression and print the lines that match. The tool took the first letters of that phrase for its name. It's woven into search boxes, word processors, and the guts of countless programs. It's among the most useful inventions in computing. A regular expression is built from just a few simple moves, and that plainness is the whole story. There's a move, for, or, so. A pattern can say match either this or that, catching both spellings of a word at once. There's a move for putting things one after another, so a pattern can say this, then this, then this. And there's a lovely move for repetition, a little mark that means the thing before it can repeat any number of times, including zero. That repeat move, sometimes called the star, is where the power comes from. It lets a short pattern stand for endlessly many strings, the way a pattern for a letter followed by any number of digits catches every phone number of every length. From those few moves, people build patterns of real subtlety, and they run fast because underneath, the pattern gets turned into something wonderfully simple. Here's what it gets turned into, and this is the heart of the whole idea. A regular expression becomes a little machine that reads the text one character at a time, left to right, never looking back. This machine has a small, fixed number of states it can be in. Think of it as a person following a flow chart made of a handful of boxes with arrows between them labeled by letters. The person starts in the first box. They read a character, follow the arrow for that character to the next box, read the next character, follow the next arrow, and so on. When the text runs out, if they've landed in a box marked as a finish, the text matched the pattern. If not, it didn't. That's the entire machine. Read a letter, move a box. Read a letter, move a box. And now, the important thing. This machine has no notepad. It has no way to keep a count that grows. All it can remember is which of its handful of boxes it's currently standing in, and there are only so many boxes, fixed once and for all when the pattern was written. It can remember a little. It cannot remember a law. It especially cannot keep a running tally that climbs higher and higher without limit, because to do that, it would need more and more boxes, and it only ever has the few it started with. This machine can recognize astonishing patterns. It cannot count without bound. That single limit turns out to be a firm, provable wall. The classic way to feel the wall is with brackets. Suppose the job is to check that a piece of text has properly matched parentheses. Every open bracket has a close bracket to go with it, correctly nested like the brackets in a math formula or the tags in a web page. For that to be right, the brackets can nest as deeply as they like, one inside another, 10 deep, 1,000 deep, with no ceiling. And to check that they all match up, the machine would have to count how many brackets are open at each moment and make sure the count comes back to zero at the end, never dipping below. But that count has no limit. It could climb as high as the text is deep, and the little flowchart machine, with its fixed handful of boxes and no notepad, simply cannot hold a count that climbs forever. It runs out of boxes. So it's been proven cleanly and permanently that no regular expression, none can check arbitrarily nested brackets. The pattern language can't count, so it can't match nesting of unlimited depth, not because nobody's clever enough, because the machine underneath has no room to keep the tally. This is one of those results that feels almost too tidy to be a deep truth, and yet it is. There's even a careful tool for proving a given pattern is beyond reach. A bit of reasoning that shows if a language really needed unlimited counting, then no finite flowchart could handle it, because it could always be fed something nested a little deeper than its number of boxes and made to lose track. The wall isn't a matter of taste or effort. It's baked into what a fixed, finite machine can be. Now, a curious thing happens when this beautiful, limited idea meets the messy, real world. And it's worth a mention because it explains a lot of confusion. The pattern tools people actually use today in their editors and programming languages slowly grew past the pure mathematical version. Programmers wanted more, so the tools sprouted extra features that the original simple machine could never do. One of them lets a pattern, say, match some chunk of text, and then later match the very same chunk again to catch a repeated word like a name said twice. That little feature reaches past the wall. It can do a kind of matching the pure flowchart machine cannot, but the power comes at a price, and the price is exactly the one this whole field keeps teaching. The moment a pattern uses those richer features, it can no longer be run by the simple, fast, one pass flowchart. It needs a slower method that sometimes has to guess, back up, and try again. And in bad cases, that guessing can balloon, turning a search that should take a blink into one that hangs for a very long time. The simple version was fast exactly because it was limited. Adding the power that broke the wall also broke the speed. So the everyday tool and the mathematical idea drifted into two different things wearing almost the same name. The pure regular expression, the one that turns into the little flowchart machine, is limited and swift and can be run over a huge document in one clean pass. Its work growing only in step with the length of the text. The souped up everyday version can match more, but it carries the risk of that slow backing up search. Most people never notice the difference because most patterns stay well inside the safe, fast part. But every so often, someone writes a pattern with those richer features, feeds it an unlucky piece of text, and watches a search box freeze. And the reason traces straight back to this wall and to the price of climbing over it. The thing to carry away from this one is small and a little wondrous. Here is a tool of real power, built from 3 or 4 simple moves, able to describe endless families of text, and it has an edge that will never move. It cannot count without limit, so it cannot see whether brackets nested to any depth all match up. That edge was proven long ago, and it's permanent. And this is the doorway into the last stretch of ideas, because up to now, the walls have been about things that break or slow down or can't be promised on time. What's coming is a different kind of wall, a small handful of questions about computers that were proven once and for all to have no answer at all. Not hard, not slow, impossible, forever by proof. And the strange comfort of those is that once something is truly proven impossible, there's nothing left to worry about. The question can simply be set down. To talk about what a computer can never do, there first has to be a clear idea of what a computer even is, deep down, underneath all the screens and wires. And the cleanest answer came before modern computers existed at all, from an English mathematician named Alan Turing, who imagined the simplest possible machine that could still compute anything computable. It's worth meeting because it's the ruler everything else gets measured against, and because it's remarkable in its plainness. Remember the little flowchart machine from the patterns, the one with a fixed handful of boxes and no notepad that could recognize but couldn't count. Now give that machine one thing. Give it an endless roll of paper, a tape stretching away forever in both directions, marked off into squares, and let it read and write on that tape. That's nearly the whole invention. Turing pictured a machine with a small rule book and a little head that sits over one square of an endless tape. The head can read the symbol in the square below it, write a new symbol there, and shift one square left or right. Then it looks up in its little rulebook what to do next, based on what it just read and which step it's on. Read, write, move, repeat. That's a Turing machine. A tiny rulebook, a head, and an endless tape to remember on. It looks almost too simple to matter. And yet that endless tape changes everything, because now the machine has room to keep a count that climbs forever, to remember as much as it needs, to nest as deep as it likes. The wall the flowchart machine hit, the one where it ran out of boxes trying to count brackets, is gone, because the tape never runs out. With just those humble moves, read, write, move, and an endless tape, this machine can carry out any computation that any computer of any size could ever carry out. That's the astonishing claim at the center of the whole field, and it's held up for the better part of a century. Here's where it turns strange. With this simple machine as a yardstick, any other system, any programming language, any gadget, any set of rules can be measured against one question: whether it can imitate the Turing machine, whether it can do those same basic things, remember without limit, repeat, and choose between paths based on a test. If it can, then it can compute exactly everything the Turing machine can compute. No less, and remarkably, no more. It reaches the very same ceiling. A system that can do this is called Turing complete. And the deep surprise is how many wildly different things turn out to be Turing complete, and how they all land on exactly the same ceiling of what's possible. Virtually every programming language in wide use is Turing complete. That already means something worth noticing. A language from the 1950s and a brand new one invented last year, however different they look, can compute exactly the same set of things. One might be faster or easier to write in or better suited to a job, but the set of problems they can solve, in principle, given enough time and memory, is identical. There's one ceiling and they all touch it. The differences are all about comfort and speed, never about what's ultimately possible. And it isn't just serious languages that reach the ceiling. This is where the fact becomes delightful. All sorts of systems that were never meant to be computers at all turn out to be Turing complete by accident. A spreadsheet program, the kind used for household budgets, is powerful enough, when pushed, to compute anything a real computer can. Certain video games are, too. In one building game, players have wired together working calculators and even simple computers out of the game's own blocks and switches, entirely inside the game world. A famous trading card game, with its stacks of rules about what each card does, has been shown to be Turing complete, meaning a game of cards played by the rules can in principle carry out any computation, even a simple grid of black and white squares that flip on and off by a few tidy rules, a kind of mathematical toy where patterns are born and die and drift across the grid, has been proven able to compute anything computable, falling patterns of dots on a grid, reaching the exact same ceiling as a supercomputer. There's something wonderful and almost funny in that. Computation isn't rare or special. It hides everywhere. Give almost any system a way to remember, a way to repeat, and a way to choose, and it becomes as powerful in principle as any computer ever built. There's a bold idea lurking under all this leveling, and it's held up remarkably well. In all the decades since Turing drew his little machine, no one has ever found a real buildable device that can compute something the Turing machine can't. Every new kind of computer, every clever gadget, every exotic scheme has turned out to reach the same ceiling and climb no higher. This observation even has a name, tied to Turing and a fellow thinker named Alonzo Church, and it amounts to a modest guess about the world. That this one simple notion of computing captures everything that can truly be computed anywhere by anything. It's never been proven because it isn't the sort of claim a proof can pin down. And it's never been broken either, and the longer it holds, the more it feels like a deep fact about the universe itself. Whatever can be computed at all seems to be exactly what that little machine with the endless tape can compute. Not everything reaches the ceiling, and the things that fall short are telling. The pattern language from before, the regular expressions with their little flowchart machine, is one of the rare useful systems that doesn't make it exactly because it can't count without bound. It's below the ceiling, and that's exactly why it's fast and safe and limited. There's a middle rung too, a kind of machine that gets a simple stack to scribble on instead of an endless tape, which can handle nested brackets that the flowchart machine couldn't, but still falls short of the full ceiling. And there are special languages built on purpose where every program is guaranteed to finish and stop, never running forever. Those deliberately stay below the ceiling, giving up some power in exchange for a promise, which is a clue, a small foreshadowing of the last two ideas. Staying below the ceiling buys the guarantee that programs always halt. Reaching the ceiling costs that guarantee. The full power and the loss of that promise come together, always, and it's no coincidence. It took a while for real machines to reach the ceiling, and the history has a small irony. Long before electronic computers, in the 1830s, an inventor named Charles Babbage designed a mechanical calculating engine that, had it ever been fully built, would have reached the ceiling. It had the crucial ingredient that simpler calculators lacked, a way to choose a different path depending on a result, to branch. Ordinary adding machines could crunch numbers all day, but they couldn't make that kind of choice, and without it, they stayed below the ceiling forever, no matter how fast or fancy. It was the ability to look at a result and decide what to do next that made the difference between a calculator and a true computer. The first machines to have it in working practice came in the 1940s. And once a machine had memory, repetition, and that power to choose, it had climbed all the way up and joined the endless company of Turing complete things, from card games to grids of dots. Now, the single most important consequence of reaching that ceiling is the one that carries straight into the final ideas, so it's worth stating plainly. The very first thing computability theory discovered, once it had this clear notion of computing, was that there are questions about these powerful systems that no system can answer. Exactly because a Turing complete machine is strong enough to do anything computable, it's also strong enough to tie itself in knots that no method can untangle. There are things about what such a machine will do given enough time that simply cannot be worked out ahead of time by anyone, by any program ever. The power and the limit are the same fact seen from two sides, and the cleanest, most famous example of that limit is the very last idea in this whole tour, the one everything has been walking toward. But there's one more idea to meet first, a smaller and stranger one that shows up the moment a system is allowed to refer to itself. Some ideas in computing are strange because they break. This next one is strange because it works, even though it seems at first glance like it shouldn't. It's an idea that folds in on itself over and over, and it's one of the central tools of the whole field. It's called recursion, and it's a way of solving a problem by having the solution refer to itself. Start with a picture, a set of Russian nesting dolls, the wooden kind. Pick up the biggest one and open it, and inside is a smaller doll. Open that one, and inside is a smaller one still. Keep going, and each doll holds a smaller doll until at last comes the tiniest doll of all, the solid little one that doesn't open. That's the whole shape of recursion in a single image. A thing that contains a smaller version of itself, which contains a smaller version of itself, down and down, until it reaches the smallest piece that can't be broken down any further. In computing, recursion means a set of instructions that, in the middle of doing its job, calls on itself to do a smaller piece of the same job. That sounds circular, and it would be, except for one crucial part. Each time the instructions call on themselves, they hand over a smaller version of the problem than the one they started with. And there's always a smallest version, an easy case that can be answered directly, with no more folding inward. That smallest case is called the base case, and it's the tiniest solid doll. It's what stops the whole thing from going forever. Think about counting the people in a long line from somewhere in the middle, where only the person right in front is visible. There's a lovely, recursive way to do it. A person turns to whoever is ahead and asks how many people stand in front of them. That person, following the very same rule, turns and asks the one ahead of them, and that one asks the next, and so on, the question rippling all the way up the line until it reaches the very first person at the front who can answer directly, with no one left to ask, nobody ahead of me. That's the base case, the smallest version, answered on the spot. Then the answer flows back. The second person hears none, adds themselves, and passes one back. The next hears one, adds themselves, passes two, and the count ripples back down the line, each person adding one to what they were told, until it reaches the person who first wondered, and the answer is theirs. Nobody in the line had to see the whole thing. Each person only knew how to ask that one small question and add one to the reply. That's recursion. A big problem solved by everyone doing the same tiny thing, passing a smaller version of the problem along until it reaches a point simple enough to answer outright, and then the answers unwind back. The magic of it, and it really is a kind of magic, is how much it can describe with how little. A short recursive definition, one that mentions itself, can stand for an endless number of computations without ever writing out a single repetition by hand. It defines the infinite with something finite. A rule that says a pile of things is either empty or one thing sitting on top of a smaller pile can describe piles of any size at all, from nothing to a million, with that one small self-referring sentence. The self-reference isn't a mistake, it's the whole power. By pointing at a smaller version of itself, a tiny rule reaches out to cover cases without end. This idea grew out of deep work in mathematical logic from the same handful of thinkers who worked out what computing even means, and it became a practical programming tool around 1960 when a computer scientist named John McCarthy built it into an early language. Before that, programmers mostly repeated things with plain loops, going around and around a fixed set of steps. Recursion offered a different way to think, where instead of looping, a piece of the program simply called on itself to handle the next layer in. And it turned out to be so powerful that some languages threw out loops entirely and used nothing but recursion, and those languages can compute every bit as much as any other. Recursion alone reaches the full ceiling. Self-reference, done carefully, is as strong as any loop, but there's a shadow to it, and it's exactly the shadow to expect from a thing that refers to itself. If the folding inward never reaches a stopping point, it goes on forever. Picture two mirrors set facing each other, with a tiny gap between. Look into one, and there's the other mirror reflected, and inside that reflection, another, and inside that another, a tunnel of reflections, shrinking away toward a vanishing point that never quite arrives. That's recursion with no base case. Each step makes another step, and nothing ever says stop, so the reflections march inward without end. In a computer, this is a real and common mistake. If a programmer writes instructions that call on themselves but forgets to include the base case, the smallest solvable version, or writes it so the problem never actually shrinks toward it, the program folds inward forever, or rather until it runs out of room and collapses. That collapse has a plain and famous name, and it comes from the way a computer keeps track of all this folding. Every time the instructions call on themselves before finishing, the computer has to remember where it was, so it can come back and pick up once the smaller version is done. It stacks up these unfinished pieces, one on top of another, like a growing stack of plates, or like all the people in that line standing there mid-question, each waiting for the answer from the one ahead before they can finish their own. As long as the folding reaches a base case soon enough, the stack grows for a while, then unwinds neatly as the answers come back. But if there's no base case, the stack of waiting pieces just grows and grows until the space set aside for it is full and the whole thing topples. That toppling is called a stack overflow. The place where so many programmers have gone for help with their broken code took its very name from this failure. It's the sound of a recursion that forgot how to stop. The truth underneath is a tidy pair of parts. A recursive solution has two halves that must both be right. There's the folding in half, which breaks the problem into a smaller version of itself and hands it along. And there's the stopping half, the base case, the smallest version answered directly, which catches the fall. The folding in half gives recursion its reach. The stopping half gives it its safety. With both, a tiny self-referring rule can solve enormous problems gracefully, the answers rippling out and then rippling back. With only the first, it's two mirrors facing each other, an endless tunnel going nowhere until the machine runs out of room. Self-reference doesn't have to be a thing pointing straight at itself either. Sometimes it goes in a small ring. One set of instructions calls a second set, and the second set, partway through its work, calls the first again, and around they go, handing the shrinking problem back and forth between them. From the outside, it still behaves like recursion, folding inward toward a stopping point, and yet no single piece ever names itself. Each one leans on its partner. This roundabout kind is called mutual recursion, and it turns up naturally when a problem has two shapes that take turns, like a thing built of alternating layers, where handling one layer means handling the other, which means handling the first again. The ring can even be three or more sets of instructions long, each calling the next, the last one calling back to the beginning. As long as the problem keeps shrinking toward a base case somewhere in the loop, the whole ring is safe, and it unwinds just like the simpler kind. Recursion sits under a huge amount of everyday computing without a fuss. When a computer sorts a giant list by splitting it in half, sorting each half and stitching the results together, each half is sorted by the same splitting rule, all the way down to lists of one thing, which are already sorted and need no work. When a program searches through a branching structure, a family tree of folders inside folders, it handles each folder by the same rule it used on the one before, going deeper until it reaches a folder with nothing inside. When it works its way through a web of things that contain smaller versions of themselves, recursion is usually the tool doing the walking. It shows up wherever a problem is made of smaller copies of itself, which is far more often than one might guess. And there's a reason this idea makes such a fitting doorway into the last piece of this whole tour. Recursion is the first place where something in computing turns and points at itself and keeps working anyway. A rule that mentions its own name, a definition that includes a smaller copy of what it's defining. As long as it always shrinks toward a stopping point, that self-reference is not only safe, it's among the most powerful ideas in the field. But self-reference has a sharper edge too, a version where a thing is asked to reason about itself with no stopping point in sight and no shrinking toward an easy answer. And when computing turns that sharper edge on itself, when a program is asked a question about programs in general, including itself, something remarkable happens. The whole idea runs into a wall that was proven long ago and forever to have no way around it. That's the last idea and the deepest one. Before the final wall, the one that's been proven shut forever, there's a different famous wall worth knowing, and it's different in a way that matters. This one has never been settled at all. It's the biggest unanswered question in computer science, and the strange thing about it is that almost everyone is sure of the answer, and nobody has been able to prove it. It's called P versus NP, and once it's seen clearly, it turns up everywhere in ordinary life. The whole thing rests on a plain gap that everyone already feels in their bones. The gap between solving a puzzle and checking a puzzle. Those are two very different jobs, and everyone knows it. Solving a jigsaw puzzle from a heap of pieces takes hours. Glancing at a finished jigsaw to see whether it's really done right takes a second. Filling in a hard Sudoku grid can take an afternoon. Checking a filled-in Sudoku to see if every row and column and box is correct takes a moment. Finding a way through a big maze is slow. Tracing a path someone already drew to see if it reaches the end is quick. Over and over in life, finding an answer is hard, and checking an answer is easy. That gap feels as solid and obvious as anything could be. Computer scientists gave the two sides of that gap names. On one side are the problems a computer can actually solve quickly, working it out from scratch in a reasonable, well-behaved amount of time. Quickly here has a careful meaning, tied to the gentle shapes from the big O ladder, the ones where the work grows slowly enough that big inputs stay manageable, well away from the runaway shapes where the work outruns the universe. The problems that can be solved quickly in that well-behaved way make up the group called. On the other side are the problems where, given a candidate answer to look at, checking it is quick, even if finding that answer from scratch might be terribly slow. The problems whose answers can be checked quickly make up the group called NP. Solving is P. Checking is NP. Now, one thing is plain right away. Anything that can be solved quickly can obviously be checked quickly, because checking it could just mean solving it over again. So everything in the solve quickly group is also in the check quickly group. P sits inside NP. The whole question, the $1,000,000 question, is whether there's anything in the check quickly group that sits outside the solve quickly group. Whether there are problems that are truly easy to check and truly hard to solve. Whether the gap that everyone feels between finding and checking is a real, permanent gap, or a gap in human cleverness that a smart enough method could close. Put as plainly as it can be put, the question is this. If a computer can always recognize a right answer quickly, the question is whether it can always find that right answer quickly too. Whether checking is secretly the same as solving, Almost everyone believes the answer is no. Almost everyone believes finding is truly harder than checking, that the gap is real, that some problems will always be easy to verify and hard to work out. Written in the field's shorthand, that belief is P is not equal to NP. The two groups are different. And when researchers have been polled over the years, the share who believe the groups are different has only climbed from around 6 in 10 at the start of the century to nearly 9 in 10 a couple of decades later. And among the deepest experts, nearly all of them, everyone's intuition points the same direction. Finding is harder than checking. Of course it is. And yet, here's the astonishing, humbling fact at the center of it. Nobody has ever proven it. Not one person in all the decades since the question was first written down clearly in the early 1970s by a researcher named Stephen Cook, and soon after, working alone on the other side of the world, by Leonid Levin. Everyone is sure finding is harder than checking. No one has managed to show it must be so. And just as unsettling, no one has shown the opposite either, that some brilliant undiscovered method could make every checkable problem solvable just as fast. The question sits there, wide open, among the most obvious seeming truths in the world, completely unproven for more than 50 years. It's considered so important and so hard that it's one of a small handful of famous mathematical problems, carrying a prize of $1 million for whoever settles it, and the money has gone unclaimed the whole time. There's a piece of this that makes it even more remarkable, and it's the part about how all these hard problems turn out to be the same problem wearing different masks. Among the Check Quickly problems, there's a special inner circle of the very hardest ones, and they have a magical property. Every single problem in the whole Check Quickly group can be mechanically rewritten quickly as one of these hardest problems. They're all secretly connected. The puzzle of finding the shortest route for a delivery driver who has to visit many towns and come home. The puzzle of packing a bag to squeeze in the most value without going over a weight limit. The puzzle of filling a giant Sudoku. Countless others, from scheduling to map coloring to circuit design. They look completely unrelated, and it's been proven that they are, underneath, the same problem in disguise. A fast method for any one of them would be a fast method for all of them, and for every checkable problem there is. They rise and fall together. This inner circle is called the NP-complete problems, and the first one was proven to belong there in the early 1970s, with the rest following as people showed, one by one, how to rewrite each as another. That connectedness is what raises the stakes so high, and it's a lovely thing to picture. All those thousands of hard, practical, seemingly separate puzzles, from the delivery route to the packed bag, are secretly a single locked door with many faces. If anyone ever found a quick way through just one of them, that one key would open all of them at once. The delivery route, the packed bag, the Sudoku, the schedule, all of them solved quickly, forever. That's what proving the two groups are actually the same would mean. And if, instead, someone proved the groups are truly different, it would settle once and for all that no such master key exists, that these puzzles really are as hard to solve as they feel, and that the gap between finding and checking is a permanent feature of the world. The consequences either way reach far past puzzles, which is part of why the question grips people. A great deal of the secrecy that guards modern life leans on the belief that certain problems are easy to check and hard to solve. Scrambling a message so that unlocking it is easy for the right person and impossibly slow for everyone else depends entirely on there being problems that can't be solved quickly. If it turned out that every checkable problem could be solved quickly after all, that gap would close, and a lot of the locks that keep secrets safe would fall open. The very first hints of this question, decades before it was named, came from exactly that worry. Back in the mid 1950s, the mathematician John Nash wrote to a code breaking agency, guessing that cracking a good enough code should take an amount of work that explodes as the code gets longer. He was feeling, without the words for it yet, the same gap, that some things are easy to check and, one hopes, brutally hard to undo. Now, it's important to be careful and honest about what this question is and isn't, because it's easy to make it sound darker than it is. This is an open question, unsolved, not a proven wall like the ones that came before, and not the proven wall that's coming. It's the great unfinished business of the field, a thing that might be settled tomorrow by someone with a new idea, or might stay open for another century. And even as it stands, the hard problems it names aren't hopeless in daily life, even though nobody knows a way to solve them quickly. In general, in the worst possible cases, real people solve real versions of them all the time, using clever methods that find good enough answers or that happen to work well on the particular shapes that come up in practice. A delivery company plans routes every single day. The route it finds might fall short of the true shortest one, the one that would take forever to be sure of, and it's still close enough to save fuel and get the packages there. The wall is about a certain kind of guarantee, a promise of always fast, always perfect in every case. In the meantime, good enough gets the job done. It's worth knowing that these hard, checkable problems aren't the end of the road either. There are problems proven to be harder still, ones where even the best possible method must take an amount of work that explodes with no escape at all. Working out the perfect play in certain board games on a board that's allowed to keep growing is known to need more than any well behaved amount of time, and that much has been settled, unlike the open question just described. Climb further up that mountain of difficulty, and the problems get harder and harder, until at the very top sit the ones that can't be cracked by any method whatsoever, no matter how much time is allowed. The famous wall at the very end of this whole tour lives up there at the summit, above even the hardest problems that can still, given enough patience, be solved. P versus NP is a question about the lower slopes, about where the line falls between the easy and the merely hard. The summit is a different country altogether. So P versus NP is a wall with a question mark still hanging over it. Everyone leans on one side. Nobody has touched the top. It's the rare place in this field where the honest thing to say is that no one knows, not the strong hunch of the experts, not the proof that would turn the hunch into fact. Finding feels harder than checking. It has never been shown to be. And that gap between what everyone believes and what anyone can prove is, in its own way, one of the most beautiful open spaces in all of human thought, which makes it the perfect thing to set beside the very last idea, because the last idea is the opposite kind of thing entirely, not an open question anyone might still answer. A question that was closed completely and forever, with a proof so clean and so strange that once it's understood, there's nothing left to wonder about, only to marvel at. And so, at the end of this long walk, here's the deepest wall of all. It was built by Alan Turing, the same person who imagined that simple machine with the endless tape, and he finished it in the mid 1930s, before there were any real computers to run on. It's called the halting problem, and it's the cleanest example of a question that cannot be answered by any program ever, and its impossibility has been proven permanently. Not open like the last one, closed, settled, done. The question itself sounds almost too modest to hide something so deep. Some programs, once started, run for a while and then finish. They halt. A program that adds up a list and prints the total, does its work, and stops. Other programs run forever. A program told to keep repeating the same step with nothing to end it will loop until the power goes out. So here's the plain question. Is there a way, a single reliable method that could look at any program at all, together with whatever it's about to work on, and always tell correctly, in advance, whether that program will eventually finish or run forever? Not for one program, for every possible program, a perfect general finish detector. It would be a wonderfully useful thing to have. It could warn a programmer that the code they just wrote will hang forever before they ever run it. It could catch every accidental, endless loop. It seems like the kind of tool that someone clever enough should be able to build. And Turing proved cleanly and for all time that no such tool can exist. Not that it's hard to build, that it's impossible in the strict sense that its very existence leads to a contradiction. And the proof is one of the most beautiful things in all of mathematics, because it works by turning the tool against itself, using the same self-reference that made recursion so powerful, now sharpened to a fine point. Here's how the argument goes, step by step, because it's worth following closely. Suppose, just suppose, that the perfect finish detector exists. Call it the checker. Hand the checker any program and it always answers correctly, without ever getting stuck itself. If the program would finish, the checker says finishes. If the program would run forever, the checker says runs forever. Always right, always giving an answer. That's the assumption. Now watch what can be built on top of it. Build a small, mischievous program. Call it the troublemaker. The troublemaker is designed to be contrary, and it does just one thing. First, it turns the checker on itself, on the troublemaker. It asks the checker to predict what the troublemaker is going to do. Then the troublemaker does the exact opposite of whatever the checker predicts. If the checker predicts that the troublemaker will finish, then the troublemaker deliberately drops into an endless loop and runs forever. And if the checker predicts that the troublemaker will run forever, then the troublemaker immediately stops. Always the opposite of the prediction. That's its whole nature. Whatever the checker says it'll do, it does the other thing. Now comes the moment the whole thing turns on. Consider what happens when the troublemaker runs. The checker inside it makes a prediction about the troublemaker. Suppose the checker predicts finishes. Then, by its contrary design, the troublemaker runs forever, which means the checker was wrong. Now suppose, instead, the checker predicts runs forever. Then the troublemaker immediately stops, which means, again, the checker was wrong. There is no third option. Whatever the checker predicts about the troublemaker is built to make that prediction false. The checker cannot be right, and the checker was supposed to always be right about every program. So, the checker cannot exist. The very assumption that a perfect finish detector could be built leads straight to a program it must get wrong. And that's the proof. No general finish detector can exist, because if it did, it could be wrapped in a program that makes a fool of it every time. It's the same shape as an old paradox about a person who always does the opposite of what they're told they'll do. No prediction about that person can ever come true, because the prediction itself changes what they do. Turn that idea into a program, feed the program its own description, and the perfect predictor collapses. The self-reference that let a tiny recursive rule reach out and describe the infinite is the very thing that, pointed the wrong way, brings the whole dream of a universal finish detector down. A program is allowed to read its own description and act on it. And that freedom, which makes these machines so powerful, is exactly what makes them impossible to fully predict. There are few things worth making clear, so the result lands as the plain truth it is and nothing darker. It does not say that finishing can never be figured out. For heaps of particular programs, it's perfectly easy to see whether they finish. A program that just prints a word and stops obviously finishes. A program that loops with no exit obviously doesn't. The impossibility is only about one single method that works for all programs at once, without exception. Any specific case might be easy. The universal answer for everything is what can't be built. It's a limit on the general tool, not on any particular question. And here's a related twist that makes it even deeper. Turing's result was soon shown to be just one instance of something much broader. It turns out that almost any interesting general question about what programs do, not just whether they finish, runs into the same wall. Whether a program will ever print a certain word, whether it will ever do a certain thing with its input for basically every meaningful property of what a program computes. There's no single method that can decide it correctly for all programs. The halting problem was the first and most famous, but it opened onto a whole landscape of questions about programs that no program can settle in general. Computing, it turns out, cannot fully understand itself. A program can do anything computable, and exactly because of that, no program can reliably answer every question about programs. This has a very down to earth consequence that working programmers live with every day. It means no tool can ever be built that reads any program at all and always says correctly whether it has some particular kind of flaw. No perfect catcher for programs that will freeze. No perfect catcher for programs that will misbehave in some chosen way. For any such perfect works on everything checker, there's a program it must get wrong by the very same self-referential trick. That's why the tools that scan software for trouble, helpful as they are, can never be both perfect and complete. They catch many cases, they miss some. They sometimes raise a warning about something that turns out fine. And the gap between those tools and perfection isn't a sign that nobody's clever enough yet. It's a wall that was proven to be there. The best any such tool can do is be genuinely useful and never flawless. This same deep idea had a twin, arriving just a few years earlier in the world of pure mathematics. A logician named Kurt Gödel had proven that in any rich enough system of mathematics, there are true statements that can never be proven within that system. There are truths the system can express but can never reach. Turing's wall and Gödel's wall are close cousins, built from the same self-referential stone, and together they marked a turning point in how people understood the limits of reasoning itself. For a long time, some of the greatest thinkers had hoped that mathematics might be a perfect machine, where every true thing could be proven and every question could be decided by following the rules. Gödel showed the proving part could never be complete. Turing showed the deciding part could never be complete either. The dream of a method for everything simply wasn't to be had, and they proved it, which is a strange gift. They didn't just fail to find a method, they showed forever that there was never one to find. There's a small, almost funny footnote that keeps the result honest. On a real computer, with a fixed and finite amount of memory, the halting problem is technically decidable because such a machine has only so many possible states, and eventually it must either stop or fall into a pattern it's been in before, repeating forever. So, in the strictest sense, for a real finite machine, the finishing question could be answered by watching long enough, but the numbers make this comfort meaningless. Even a modest machine has so many possible states that checking them all would take unimaginably longer than the age of the universe many times over. One early thinker worked out that a fairly small machine would have a number of states written as a 1 followed by hundreds of thousands of zeros, and that a journey through all of them, even at impossible speeds, would make the whole lifetime of the galaxy seem like nothing. So the tidy loophole slams shut in practice. For any machine big enough to matter, the wall stands exactly where Turing put it. This limit even shapes how careful programmers work in the most demanding places. Because no tool can catch every possible endless loop, people building software that absolutely must finish on time, the kind that flies planes or runs medical machines, often deliberately write in a hobbled, less powerful style, a language that can't do everything a full computer can, so that it becomes possible to prove their programs always finish. They give up some of the full power on purpose, stepping back below the ceiling from before, because staying below the ceiling is exactly what buys back the promise that the program will always stop. The full power and the loss of the guarantee come together always. The two are the same fact, seen from two sides one more time, and that's the last wall. A question as simple as, will this program finish, asked in general about all programs, has a proven, permanent, unanswerable answer. No method can ever exist to decide it for every case. It was settled almost a century ago by turning a machine's own cleverness against itself, and it will never come undone. Unlike the great open question before it, there's nothing here left to wonder whether someone will one day solve. It's solved. The answer is that there is no answer, and there never can be, and the proof of that is one of the cleanest and most lasting things the human mind has ever produced. So that's the whole tour, and it's a lot to hold at once. The details were never really the point. The shapes were. Think back over the ground it covered. Deep inside every machine, small fractions can't be written out in full. So the numbers get rounded to close copies. And once in a great while, someone follows the smallness all the way down. Short fingerprints stand in for enormous things, which makes machines fast and also makes it certain that two different things will someday share a print, sooner than instinct expects. Fast turned out to mean the shape of the growing, where a clever search shrugs off a pile 1,000 times bigger while a clumsy one drowns in it. Then the machines had to work together, and new kinds of stuckness appeared. 5 philosophers at a table, each holding one fork, waiting forever until someone breaks the ring. 2 libraries and a dead phone line, forced to choose between agreeing and answering. A group of generals with a two-faced liar among them, safe only if the honest ones are a strong enough crowd. A room of machines that can't be promised to agree on time because a pause and an ending look the same from the outside, and then the walls that never move. A pattern language that can't count, so it can never match brackets nested to any depth. The great open question of whether finding is truly harder than checking, which everyone believes and no one has proven. And at the end, the cleanest wall of all. No program can ever exist that tells for every program whether it will finish or run forever. That one was proven long ago by folding a machine's own cleverness back on itself, and it will stand for as long as there's anyone left to think about it. There's a real comfort in that last one. Most unanswered questions nag because maybe the answer is out there, just out of reach. This one doesn't nag. The answer is known, and the answer is that there is no answer, and there never can be. Nothing left to solve, nothing left to chase, just a small, permanent piece of the world, sitting where it was set down almost 100 years ago. A question that will never be answered, and that's perfectly all right.